It was a brisk morning in downtown Chicago. The streets were packed with people bundled up in winter coats, their faces turned downward against the chilly wind. The sun fought through the clouds, casting a dull glow over the bustling city. Amidst the rush, Donald Trump, in his signature dark overcoat and a red tie peeking from under it, walked briskly down Michigan Avenue, his mind on the busy day ahead. He was in town for a meeting but had decided to take a short break, stretching his legs before heading to the conference room. But something made him stop in his tracks. As he neared Millennium Park, he noticed a woman sitting alone on the sidewalk against a building, her figure hunched against the cold. She was holding a cardboard sign that read, "Veteran in Need. Please help." Her eyes scanned the crowd, but most people hurried by without a second glance. It was a scene Trump had seen too many times in his travels, but something about her seemed different. There was a quiet dignity about her that caught his attention. Trump slowed his pace, his curiosity piqued. What was her story? Why was she out there asking for help? His steps were slow but deliberate as he approached the woman, cutting through the busy crowd. "Ma'am," Trump said, his voice steady yet gentle. "What's your name?" The woman looked up in surprise. Her tired eyes met his, and for a moment, the noise of the city seemed to fade away. She hesitated, unsure of what to say, before softly responding, "Teresa." That moment, right there, would set the stage for something far beyond either of their expectations. Teresa, a homeless veteran, had been struggling for years, her life overshadowed by a series of unfortunate events that had left her without a home or family. But what Donald Trump didn't know as he stood there looking down at her, was that this seemingly small encounter would end up changing everything, not just for Teresa but for everyone who would later hear her story. The turning point, an unexpected gesture. Teresa had been on the streets for months, but her journey had started long before that. She had served in the military years ago, but after returning home, the transition was harder than she could have ever imagined. Without a stable job, the mounting pressure of unpaid bills, and the lack of support, she had eventually lost her home. Despite all of this, Teresa's sense of pride remained intact. She wasn't used to asking for help, but as time passed, survival became the only thing that mattered. She had learned to navigate the harsh realities of life on the streets. Some days were better than others, but hope had become a luxury she could barely afford. She spent her days sitting on busy sidewalks, her cardboard sign offering the only chance for a few spare dollars or maybe even some food. But more often than not, people ignored her, walking past without a second thought. But on that cold morning, something changed. When Trump approached her and asked her name, it wasn't just an ordinary encounter. It was the first time in a long while someone had seen her not as a homeless person but as a human being, someone with a name, a story, a life. It wasn't just his words that made a difference, but his actions that followed. He didn't just toss $1 into her cup and walk away. He stopped, took a moment, and engaged with her on a personal level. "Teresa, what happened?" he asked gently. "How can I help?" It wasn't a question of pity, it was one of genuine interest. In that brief exchange, Trump showed a level of empathy and care that Teresa hadn't experienced in years. She began to open up, telling him about her struggles, her time in the military, and the painful series of events that had led her to the streets. For Trump, it wasn't about politics, fame, or public image. In that moment, it was about being present for another person, about recognizing the humanity in someone who had long been overlooked by society. A ripple effect, the power of one act of kindness. As their conversation continued, Trump made a promise. "I'm going to do everything I can to help you get back on your feet." He didn't just make empty promises, he followed through. Over the next few days, he arranged for Teresa to receive the help she desperately needed: a roof over her head, access to medical care, and the support to get back on her feet. But the impact of that single encounter didn't stop there. Word of Trump's kindness spread quickly. Teresa's story became a symbol of hope, reminding people of the power of small, thoughtful actions. The media caught wind of the story, and soon, others who had struggled like Teresa began to reach out, inspired by what one person's attention and compassion had done. People from all walks of life were touched by the story, and many offered their help to Teresa, sending donations and resources. What started as one simple act of kindness had a domino effect, creating a ripple that changed more lives than anyone could have anticipated. The lesson: how small acts lead to big changes. The story of Teresa and Trump is not just about one person's act of kindness, it's about the ripple effect that kindness can have on the world. What Teresa had thought was an ordinary encounter turned out to be a turning point in her life, one that not only gave her the chance to rebuild but also reminded others of the importance of seeing people for who they are, not just what they appear to be. This story serves as a powerful reminder that we all have the ability to make a difference. We don't need to be famous or wealthy to have an impact. Sometimes, the simplest gestures, stopping to listen, offering a word of encouragement, or lending a helping hand, can change a person's life in ways we may never fully understand. If we all take a moment to show kindness, to be present for someone else, we might just change the course of their life, and our own. Whether it's a homeless veteran on the streets or a colleague struggling in silence, we all have the power to make a difference. It starts with one action, one conversation, and a willingness to see others as human beings, deserving of dignity, respect, and kindness. So, the next time you encounter someone in need, remember Teresa's story. What might seem like a small gesture could be the beginning of a life-changing journey for someone who just needs someone to see them. Teresa Hensley never expected her life to end up where it did. Growing up in a small town in Indiana, she had always been drawn to the idea of making a difference. Her family wasn't wealthy, but they worked hard and always tried to do what was right. Her father, a Navy veteran, and her mother, who worked long hours to support the family, taught her the value of selflessness and perseverance. Teresa admired their strength and dreamed of following in her father's footsteps. At 18, Teresa enlisted in the army, motivated by a deep sense of duty. It wasn't about escaping her small-town life or seeking glory, it was about standing up for something greater than herself. Her time in the military gave her direction, discipline, and pride. She excelled in training, earning respect from both her peers and superiors. Teresa felt at home in the military. It gave her a sense of purpose, a place where she truly belonged. Facing the harsh reality of war. During her 12 years of service, Teresa was deployed twice overseas. The experiences she had in those war zones would stay with her forever, seeing the destruction, the loss, and the heartache that no one should ever have to witness. Her best friend, Sarah, was killed in a blast during their second deployment, a loss that hit Teresa harder than anything she had faced before. The grief was overwhelming, but Teresa, ever the soldier, pushed it aside and kept going. She had a job to do. But it wasn't just the loss of her friend that would haunt her, it was the constant reminder that her body was no longer the same. An injury during a training exercise left her with permanent damage to her leg. It wasn't the kind of injury that could be fixed easily. It took months for doctors to even diagnose it properly, and years for her to recover. Even now, the pain still lingered, reminding her every day of the sacrifices she had made. The struggles of returning home. When Teresa was discharged from the military with an honorable record, she expected her transition back to civilian life to be difficult. But she didn't anticipate how much harder it would be than she imagined. The routine and camaraderie of military life had been replaced with a world that didn't understand her. The job market was tough, and employers didn't know how to accommodate her injury. Teresa had saved what she could during her time in service, but it wasn't enough to cover the cost of rent and bills, and soon she found herself struggling just to get by. The months passed and the weight of her situation grew heavier. Her once promising military career felt like a distant memory. The friends she had made during her service had moved on, leaving her isolated in a city that felt foreign and cold. She moved from one cramped apartment to the next, unable to keep up with the rising costs of living. The loneliness became suffocating, and despite all her efforts, Teresa couldn't seem to catch a break. A harsh reality on the streets of Chicago. By the time Teresa found herself on the streets of Chicago, the pain of it all had become too much to bear. The physical ache in her leg, the emotional toll of losing her military career, and the crushing weight of constant rejection had taken their toll. She spent her days sitting on the same corner, holding a cardboard sign, hoping for just a few dollars. Every day felt like a struggle to stay afloat, to keep her head above water. The cold winds of November blew through the city, and Teresa's legs ached from sitting for hours on end. Her hands trembled, not just from the biting cold, but from the fear and uncertainty that clouded her thoughts. She had served her country with everything she had, yet here she was, barely surviving. But despite everything, Teresa held on to a part of herself that refused to let go. When she found a quiet moment, she thought about her parents and the lessons they had taught her. She still believed in the idea of service, even if she wasn't sure how to serve anymore. She still believed in helping others even though she had so little to give. A life-changing moment. On that cold November day when Teresa was at her lowest, she never expected that anything, let alone someone like Donald Trump, would notice her. She was just another homeless woman on a busy city street, struggling to make ends meet. But something in her eyes, something about the way she held herself, caught Trump's attention. As he walked down Michigan Avenue, bundled up against the cold, he saw her sitting there. It wasn't the sign that caught his eye, it was Teresa herself. There was something about her quiet dignity, the way she held her ground despite the obvious pain in her life, that made him stop. In that moment, Teresa's life was about to change in ways she couldn't have imagined. The conversation that followed, simple yet profound, was just the beginning of a journey that would transform everything. The chill of November swept through the streets of Chicago, biting at Teresa Hensley's skin as she huddled against the cold. Wrapped in a thin jacket, she gripped her cardboard sign, the edges trembling in the wind. The sign, scrawled with "Homeless Veteran, Anything Helps," felt like a constant reminder of how far she'd fallen. Her fingers, stiff and numb from the cold, barely held on. She stared down at the sidewalk, the world around her blurring into the hum of city sounds, the honking taxis, the rush of pedestrians, the murmur of the crowd. Despite the physical pain and the gnawing emptiness in her stomach, Teresa held herself upright. It was an unspoken promise she'd made to herself. No matter how hard it got, she would not give in to the fatigue or despair. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was hope that anyone would see her and offer a shred of kindness. And then, out of the constant stream of passers-by, a figure stopped. Teresa hadn't thought much of the people who usually walked by, most of them too busy to even glance at her. But this man, he was different. Tall, dressed in an immaculate suit, he stood in front of her, his presence cutting through the noise of the city. Teresa's breath caught in her throat. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. He looked at her with a kind of focus, not the dismissive glance most people gave to the homeless. He wasn't just looking at the worn clothes, the tired eyes, he was looking at her. "Are you okay?" His voice was calm, sincere, and it felt like he really wanted to know. Teresa blinked, startled by the question. She wasn't sure how to respond. In all the time she'd spent on the streets, no one had ever asked her that. "Not really. I'm fine," she said quickly, her voice barely more than a whisper. It wasn't true, of course. She wasn't fine. She hadn't been fine for a long time. But she didn't know how to admit that. The man didn't look away. His gaze softened, his expression filled with empathy. "I know it's tough," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "But you're not alone." The words hit her harder than she expected. For so long, Teresa had felt invisible, ignored by the world around her. But in that moment, with that simple statement, she felt seen. Not alone. For the first time in a long while, someone acknowledged her pain, her struggle. It was all she needed to hear. Then he did something that took her completely by surprise. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded bill. He placed it into her hands gently, his fingers warm against hers. Teresa looked up, confused, as if this moment couldn't possibly be real. "You deserve better than this," he said softly, his eyes sincere. "I can help you get back on your feet. If you want that, I can help you." Teresa's heart raced, and she had to blink to make sure she wasn't imagining it. "What?" she stammered. Could this really be happening? A stranger, someone who could have easily walked on by like everyone else, was offering to help her? Her mind scrambled. Could she even trust this? Was he really offering a hand up, not a handout? Could she accept it without feeling like she was giving up too much of her pride? "I just need a chance," Teresa whispered, her voice trembling. "I just need a chance to prove I can do it." The man's expression remained steady. "Then take it," he said. "I'm not offering you a handout. I'm offering you an opportunity to take your life back." Teresa's chest tightened, her emotions swirling. He wasn't just giving her money, he was offering something far more valuable, a second chance. A chance she hadn't believed in for so long. The weight of it all hit her, and for the first time in ages she felt a flicker of hope. She reached out, shaking his hand firmly. This wasn't just a transaction. It felt like a silent promise, a mutual agreement that she wasn't going to waste this chance. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice filled with genuine encouragement. "You've got a second chance now." As the man walked away, Teresa stayed frozen for a moment, still holding the bill, her hand trembling not from the cold, but from the enormity of what had just happened. It wasn't the money that mattered. It wasn't the offer of help either. What had mattered was the feeling he'd given her, the feeling that she wasn't invisible. That someone in the middle of the crowded streets saw her. A moment of kindness that would change everything. For the first time in a long while, Teresa believed in the possibility of a better life. She wasn't ready to give up, not now. With one simple, unexpected act of kindness, a stranger had given her hope. And that hope was worth more than anything else. Her life wasn't over. She had a chance to start again. The days following that encounter with the man felt like a blur to Teresa. She was still holding on to the hope that had started to grow in her heart, but reality had a way of pulling her back. Each day she fought to survive, picking up odd jobs wherever she could, working long hours, scraping by with barely enough to eat. It felt like she was stuck in a cycle, struggling but never quite moving forward. Still, every morning she reminded herself to keep going. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, even on the toughest days. But despite her best efforts, the grind of everyday life wore her down. The endless search for a steady job, the stacks of paperwork, the nights spent shivering in the cold, everything was harder than she had imagined. Her body was tired, her spirit strained, but one thing kept her going: the memory of the man who had given her a second chance. His words replayed in her mind like a soft echo, reminding her that she wasn't invisible, that she wasn't alone. But the practicalities of life still weighed heavily on her. Every step forward felt like an uphill battle. Then one evening everything changed. As Teresa trudged down the street after yet another exhausting shift at a rundown diner, she heard someone calling her name. It was a voice she didn't recognize at first. "Teresa?" The voice shouted, cutting through the noise of the city. Teresa froze. She glanced across the street, her curiosity piqued. A woman was hurrying toward her, her expression eager, her eyes bright with recognition. Teresa squinted, trying to place her. "Do I know you?" she asked, confused. The woman smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "You don't recognize me, do you? I'm Emily, the woman from the shelter a few weeks ago." The shelter. Teresa's mind raced, flipping through the faces she'd seen there, searching for Emily. Then it clicked. Emily had been sitting across from her one evening. A quiet woman who had lost her home and family in a fire. Teresa remembered offering her some comfort, though she hadn't known then that Emily had noticed her too. Emily had seen the kindness in Teresa's eyes. I remember now," Teresa said softly, a sense of warmth filling her chest. "How are you doing?" Emily smiled with pride. "I'm doing much better, actually. I found a place to stay and I'm starting a new job next week." She paused, glancing around as if checking for any prying eyes. "But that's not why I'm here. I've been looking for you, Teresa. I need to tell you something." Teresa's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" she asked, her voice filled with anticipation. Emily's eyes sparkled as she leaned in closer. "You won't believe this, but I ran into someone the other day, a man. The one who helped you on the street." The image of the stranger flashed in Teresa's mind. "He's been watching me?" Her pulse quickened. She hadn't even gotten his name, hadn't asked him for details. All she knew was that he had offered her a chance, a lifeline when everything seemed lost. "Did you see him?" Teresa asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. Emily nodded. "Yes. And he's been keeping an eye on you. That money he gave you? It wasn't just a handout. He told me to make sure you didn't give up. He said you had something special." Teresa's chest tightened. Could it really be? Had he been watching her, believing in her all along? "He wants to meet with you," Emily continued. "He's offering you more than just a chance. He's offering you a way out." "A way out?" Teresa repeated, stunned. "What do you mean?" Emily smiled, her excitement palpable. "I'm not supposed to tell you everything. But you've got to meet him. I can set it up." The next day, Teresa found herself standing at the entrance of a tall, sleek building, one she hadn't even noticed before. Her heart pounded in her chest as she wondered what awaited her inside. This wasn't just some fleeting gesture of kindness. This was real. This was it. The opportunity she had been hoping for. She stepped into the elevator, her breath shallow. With each floor that passed, the weight of the moment grew heavier. Was she really about to meet him again? The man who had seen her as more than just a homeless woman? The man who had given her a second chance? When the elevator doors opened, Teresa stepped into a polished office, the kind of place she had never imagined walking into. The man was already there, sitting behind a sleek desk. He looked up, his expression warm and reassuring. "Teresa," he said, rising from his seat, "I'm glad you came." She stood there speechless. She wanted to ask so many questions. How had he found her? Why had he chosen to help her? But in his steady gaze, she saw that none of those questions mattered. All that mattered was that she was here, right now, in front of him. "Sit down." He gestured toward the chair across from him, a glass of water waiting for her. As she sat, he continued, his voice calm. "I know you've been struggling. But I also know that you're capable of more than you think." Teresa's heart raced. Could this really be happening? He wasn't just offering her a handout. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering a way out, an opportunity to change her life. He continued, "I've been watching your progress. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Teresa. I want to offer you a job, one that's going to help you rebuild your life." It won't be easy, but I believe in you. A job. He was offering her a chance to start over, to take control of her future. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about living, about rebuilding everything she had lost. Teresa's pulse quickened as the magnitude of his words sank in. But then she understood the twist. He wasn't offering charity. He wasn't offering pity. He was offering her the keys to a future she hadn't dared to dream of. She had proven herself. Not just by surviving, but by showing him the strength that she hadn't realized she had. This was her chance. And for the first time in a long time, Teresa realized that the best gifts don't come from pity. They come from people who truly believe in you. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a road she was ready to walk. Walking out of the sleek office building, Teresa felt something shift inside her. A weight she hadn't realized she was carrying finally lifted. She hadn't just been offered a job, she had been handed a lifeline. It wasn't the perfect solution, and the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years she felt like the world was reaching out to help her, not push her down. The job was tough, demanding far more than she had expected. But it also gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in ages. Every morning she woke up earlier, determined to tackle whatever the day threw at her. The challenges came fast, but so did the opportunities to learn. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about growth. Her co-workers, though initially wary, became a source of support, and with their encouragement she started to feel like she belonged. Slowly but surely she was building a stable life, something she'd only dreamed about not too long ago. Teresa's transformation was gradual, but it was real. She wasn't just getting by anymore, she was thriving. She worked hard, pushing herself to do more, learn faster, and be better. And every night she came home to her own apartment, a space that was hers to make her own. The uncertainty of the past had been replaced by a steady routine. No longer did she look in the mirror and see a woman defeated by her circumstances. Instead, she saw someone who had fought for every step forward and was now reaping the rewards of her persistence. But as her life began to settle, Teresa couldn't forget those she had left behind. She thought about the women from the shelter, the ones she had shared meals with, and the stories of struggle and survival that had shaped her. One person in particular stood out: Emily, the woman who had been there when Teresa was at her lowest. Emily had found her footing, and now Teresa felt a pull to reconnect. They met for coffee, and when Emily saw how far Teresa had come, her eyes filled with pride. "You did it, Teresa," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You really did it?" Teresa smiled, but she knew this wasn't just her victory. "It's not just me, Emily. It's all of us. It's about showing up, every single day, even when it's hard." They talked for hours, reflecting on their journeys and the lessons they had learned. Teresa realized that her new life wasn't just about her anymore. It was a chance to help others who were still stuck in the cycle of poverty and homelessness. The kindness she had received had lit a fire within her, and now, it was her turn to pass that on. Over the next few months, Teresa made a choice that would forever change her path. She began volunteering at local shelters, using her stability to help others who were still struggling. As she spent time with people who had once been where she was, she saw their resilience, their determination to overcome. And in their strength, she found her own renewed hope. One evening, while she was at the shelter serving a meal, she overheard a conversation that struck her deeply. A young man no older than 20 was talking to a counselor about his dreams of going to school despite everything stacked against him. His voice was filled with uncertainty, but there was also a spark of hope. Teresa walked over and knelt beside him, her heart full of compassion. "You can do this," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I've been where you are. If I can make it, so can you." The young man's eyes widened, disbelief mixing with a flicker of hope. In that moment, Teresa knew she had made a difference, not just in his life but in her own. Her journey hadn't just been about finding her way out, it had been about learning how to inspire others to believe in their own potential. As Teresa stood outside the shelter that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she reflected on everything she had overcome. She had come from nothing, and the city that had once felt so cold and isolating now felt full of possibility. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living, thriving, and helping others to do the same. Her thoughts drifted to the man who had first seen her, the one who had offered her that chance. He hadn't given her a handout or a promise of instant success. He had given her something far more valuable, a belief in herself. And now, Teresa understood that his gift wasn't about wealth or status. It was about transformation, the kind that happens when someone believes in you, when they see your potential even when you can't. Her life had changed, and in turn she was changing the world around her, one small act of kindness at a time. Teresa's story isn't just inspiring, it's a powerful reminder of the profound impact kindness, selflessness, and belief in ourselves can have, especially in times of hardship. It shows us that no matter where we begin or how challenging the journey, change is possible. But here's the truth, it starts with one small act. One decision to believe in yourself, offer a helping hand, and choose to make a difference. Teresa's transformation wasn't a one-off miracle, it was the result of consistent acts of kindness, both given and received, and a steadfast belief in the power of self and others. The ripple effect of kindness. What's remarkable about Teresa's journey is how the kindness she received from strangers not only changed her life, but inspired her to give back. She didn't just find a job, she found purpose, she found hope, and ultimately she became that beacon of hope for others. Her story raises an important question. How could a simple act of kindness change your life or someone else's? In today's fast-paced world, it's easy to forget the lasting impact of small gestures. A kind word, a helping hand, or just showing someone they matter can create ripples that extend far beyond the moment. Teresa's experience serves as a powerful reminder. Even the smallest acts of kindness can lead to profound changes. Whether it's a compliment, a moment of empathy, or a shared cup of coffee, we never truly know how much that moment might mean to someone. Imagine what could happen. What if we all took a moment each day to show kindness? What if we offered support to those around us, or simply took the time to listen to someone who might feel invisible? Teresa's story challenges us to consider how we might make a difference in someone's life, even with just a small action. Maybe there's someone in your life who feels overlooked or isolated, just like Teresa once did. What could you do to make their day a little easier, a little brighter? The beauty of kindness is that it doesn't only benefit the person receiving it, it transforms us too. When we choose to lift someone else up, we often find ourselves lifted in return. Teresa's journey wasn't just about rebuilding her life, it was about understanding that in helping others, we discover our own strength and potential. Join the movement. As you reflect on Teresa's journey, consider how you can make a positive impact in the lives of those around you. It's easy to get caught up in our own goals and ambitions, but true fulfillment comes when we lift others up along the way. Embrace kindness and you'll open doors, not only for yourself but for everyone whose life you touch. Now it's your turn. You have the power to make a difference. What will you do with that power? If Teresa's story has moved you, share it. Spread the message. Like, comment, and let others know how even the smallest acts of kindness can create extraordinary transformations. Together we can build a community where kindness is the rule, not the exception. And together we can make the world a better place, one act of kindness at a time. Will you join us?